the air smelled like rain that afternoon, sharp and clean, just before the storm broke. I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel when the knock came slow, deliberate, too heavy for a friendly visit. And when I opened the door, there he was, my son, 12 years gone, standing beside the woman who'd helped him forget me. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because sometimes the people you die for are the ones who return to finish the job. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and her gaze slid past me like I was furniture. The luggage at their feet said this wasn't a visit. That was the moment my mother's heart collided with my intuition. Let me show you how it all began. When I opened the door that morning, the air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I didn't expect to see anyone, let alone them. There they stood on my porch. Ryan, my son I hadn't seen in 12 years, and Melissa, the woman who had once called me mom before cutting me out of their lives completely. 2 suitcases rested beside their feet. Their faces told me everything. They weren't here by accident. For a moment, I couldn't move. My heart raced, but my voice stayed calm, as if my body refused to let my emotions take control. Time seemed to stretch, carrying the weight of everything unspoken between us. I saw the years etched into Ryan's face, the quiet exhaustion behind Melissa's smile, and beneath it all, I sensed the same thing I'd seen the day they left. Self-interest wrapped in charm. They said nothing, but I didn't need them to. I knew that kind of silence too well. It's the kind people use when they're waiting for you to offer what they came for: money, comfort, forgiveness. The old me would have invited them in without question, desperate to fill the silence with peace. But I've learned that silence isn't always peace. It's often a test of strength. So I stood there, steady, letting the moment breathe, knowing I wasn't the same woman they abandoned all those years ago. And as I looked into my son's eyes, I felt the past stirring, demanding to be told. You might wonder how we got here, how a mother and son could go 12 years without a word. The truth is, it didn't happen all at once. It was a slow unraveling, like a thread pulling loose from the edge of a favorite sweater, until the whole thing came apart in my hands. After my husband passed, it was just Ryan and me. I worked double shifts at a small diner off Route 9, scraping together every dollar to keep a roof over our heads. Ryan was my reason to wake up at 5 every morning, and my prayer before I went to sleep. He was a bright boy, kind-hearted, funny, full of dreams. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, he'd never feel the kind of struggle I did. But somewhere along the way, love started turning into distance. When he met Melissa, everything changed. She was confident, polished, from a family that never had to count pennies at the grocery store. I told myself I was happy for him, but deep down, I could feel her pulling him away. The calls came less often, then stopped altogether. Birthdays went by quietly. Holidays became just dates on a calendar. I used to set the table for 3 out of habit, then for 2, and finally, just for myself. The silence hurt more than any words could have. I tried to fill it with work, with small hobbies, with anything that would make the house feel less empty. Then one afternoon, life surprised me. I scratched a ticket at the gas station near work and won the regional lottery, $751. I remember standing there in shock, surrounded by strangers cheering. But inside, I felt nothing. No joy, no excitement, just an aching realization that there was no one left to share it with. That was the day I decided to change. I paid off the house, retired from the diner, and learned how to live quietly. I found peace in early mornings and long walks, in learning how to enjoy my own company. I promised myself I'd never let anyone take advantage of me again, not even my own son. And maybe that's why, when I saw him standing on my porch after all these years, I didn't crumble. I stood taller, because deep down, I knew life had brought him back. But this time, I was ready. I thought I'd moved on until that knock came. When I opened the door, time folded in on itself. For a heartbeat, I saw my son as he used to be, bright-eyed, full of possibility. But that illusion broke the moment I noticed how carefully his smile was placed, how Melissa's eyes darted over my shoulder, scanning the living room as if assessing its worth. They looked exhausted, not from travel, but from the kind of life that wears you down inside. There was no warmth in their presence, only an uneasy politeness that felt rehearsed. They told me they'd been in the area and wanted to visit. I didn't believe that for a second. I could almost taste the desperation behind their charm, and though my chest tightened, my face stayed calm. The years had taught me that silence is power. So, I stepped aside and let them in, not out of softness, not out of longing, but because I wanted to see what they'd do when they thought they had the upper hand. Inside, everything felt smaller, the air heavier. Melissa commented on how lovely the house looked, her tone too sweet, too deliberate. Ryan sat on the edge of the couch, his hands fidgeting the way they did when he was a boy caught lying. I studied them quietly, the matching gold watches, the tension in their posture, the way they avoided each other's eyes. In the reflection of the window, I caught my own face, older, calmer, harder to read. I realized I had prepared for this moment long before it arrived. Every quiet evening spent alone had been training for this exact test. As they began speaking about how things had been tough lately, I felt no anger, only clarity. This wasn't about love or regret. It was about need. And for the first time, I understood. I wasn't the vulnerable one in this story anymore. I sat across from them, letting their words tumble into the quiet between us, and smiled to myself. The game had begun. And they didn't even know I was the one holding the pieces. The living room felt different with them sitting there, like the air had thickened somehow. Ryan and Melissa sat on the couch they'd once helped me pick out years ago, back when we still spoke. Now, every cushion, every framed photo seemed to hold its breath. The silence between us wasn't comfortable. It was measured, cautious. They made small talk, how long the drive was, how they'd been meaning to visit, how they missed me. But I could hear the gaps in their words, the nervous tremor hiding behind every smile. I watched Ryan glance at the family photos on the mantel, his eyes lingering on the one from his college graduation. He couldn't even look me in the eye for more than a second. Melissa, always poised, fiddled with her bracelet as she complimented the house again, her eyes darting toward the glass cabinet where I kept nothing of real value. But she didn't know that. I nodded, smiled, said little. On the surface, I must have seemed calm and welcoming. Inside, I was studying them like a chessboard, because I already knew. I knew about the business that failed, the loans they'd taken, the house they lost last spring. I knew about the lawsuit Ryan had tried to hide, the credit cards they'd maxed out under fake names. I knew more about their lives than they realized, And not because I was told. Months ago, something in my gut had whispered that this day would come. So, I'd taken precautions. A quiet phone call to a discreet investigator confirmed everything. When he handed me that folder full of facts and figures, I didn't feel anger. I felt ready. Ready for the moment they'd show up, pretending it was about family. Ready to see how far they'd go to manipulate the woman they once underestimated. As they spoke, I noticed the way Melissa's hand reached for Ryan's knee whenever the topic of work came up. A small, rehearsed gesture meant to seem affectionate, but meant to control. And Ryan, my son, he looked like a man caught between shame and survival. There was a time that would have broken me, but not anymore. I realized something as I sat there, listening to them spin their stories. Power doesn't come from what you own. It comes from what you know, and what you choose to keep to yourself. So I let them talk. I nodded at the right moments, pretended to be curious. All the while, I was quietly turning the pieces of their story in my mind, waiting for the right time to set them down on the table. They thought they'd come to play me. They didn't know the game had already started, and I was the one holding the rules. The room felt too quiet, the kind of silence that hums beneath polite conversation. They kept talking about ordinary things, traffic, the weather, how the neighborhood had changed, but every word was laced with tension, like a thread stretched too thin. I watched their faces carefully, listening not to what they said, but to what they didn't. Melissa spoke the most, as always. She had that way of wrapping discomfort in charm, saying too much without revealing anything real. Ryan sat still beside her, nodding along, trying to seem at ease. But I could see the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. The same one I used to see when he was a boy who'd broken something and didn't want to admit it. I asked gentle questions, not to accuse, but to observe. How was his business partner? Marcus. The moment I said the name, I felt the air shift. Melissa's smile faltered. Ryan's shoulders stiffened. They tried to recover, offering vague answers, but I didn't push. I didn't have to. The truth was already bleeding through their composure. Inside, I felt no rage, only a strange calm. I had seen the reports, the legal filings with Ryan's name on them. I knew Marcus had turned on him, that the fraud investigation wasn't just rumor. I knew Melissa's family inheritance had been long spent, that the house they'd boasted about had been foreclosed months ago. They thought they could hide behind performance. But I'd lived through real loss. And once you've survived that, you see through everything else. So I let them keep talking, digging themselves deeper into their story. Each excuse sounded smaller, thinner. I realized then that truth doesn't always need to be shouted. Sometimes it just needs to be allowed to breathe. And when it does, it fills the room like light. Finally, I leaned back and let my silence speak. That was when Ryan looked up, really looked at me. I saw the moment it hit him. He knew I knew. The color drained from his face. His eyes dropped. And in that second, I saw the boy he used to be and the man he'd become. The space between them broke my heart. I didn't gloat. I didn't demand an explanation. I simply felt the weight of years settling into a kind of sad clarity. I had loved him so fiercely once that I'd ignored every warning sign. Now, I loved myself enough to stop pretending. Forgiveness doesn't mean blindness. I thought, it means finally seeing things as they are and choosing peace anyway. As the sun began to fade through the window, I knew this was only the beginning. There was still one truth left to tell, and it would change everything. The silence stretched long enough to feel like a living thing between us. Ryan stared at the floor. Melissa's hands clutched the edge of her purse, and for a moment, I almost pitied them. Almost. I could feel the war inside me, the instinct to protect my son warring against the truth I could no longer ignore. There was a time when I would have softened, filled the space with comfort, told him we'd figure it out together. But that woman no longer existed. She had been buried under years of neglect, rebuilt piece by piece from loneliness and hard lessons. So, I began to speak, not in anger, but with a steadiness that even surprised me. I told them I knew everything about the fraudulent business accounts, the loans under my name, the way they'd manipulated friends to invest in empty promises. I spoke of Marcus, the partner who had sold him out to save himself. I told them I'd seen the documents, the court filings, the numbers that didn't lie. Ryan looked up then, his face pale, his eyes wet. He tried to explain, but the words caught in his throat. I could see the boy he once was fighting through the shame. And in that moment, I understood something painful. He hadn't come here just for money. He'd come here because he had nowhere left to hide. Melissa turned defensive first, her pride rising like armor. But even she wilted under the weight of silence. I didn't interrupt her justifications or her tears. I simply waited. When she finally stopped, I took a deep breath and told them the truth they didn't expect. I wasn't here to punish them, but I also wasn't going to save them. If Ryan wanted to make things right, I said, there would be no handouts, no checks, no blank forgiveness. What I could give was direction, a therapist's number, a contact for a restitution program, and a lawyer who could negotiate a settlement for the fraud investigation, but only if Ryan agreed to take responsibility. I told them love without boundaries isn't love. It's self-destruction, and I loved them too much to destroy myself again. Ryan's shoulders sagged, the fight gone from him. I saw the exact moment his pride broke. He whispered that he didn't deserve my help, and he was right. But still, I gave him the lawyer's card, because sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is learning when to let them stand in their own fire. As they gathered their things, Melissa's silence was heavy, almost defeated. Ryan lingered, looking at me like a man who'd lost everything, but was finally willing to rebuild. I told him quietly that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let it poison the future. When the door closed behind them, I didn't cry. I just sat there, the quiet wrapping around me like a blanket. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt honest. And in that stillness, I realized sometimes peace doesn't come from reunion. It comes from release. The house feels lighter now. Mornings have become my favorite time again. The soft light spilling through the curtains, the quiet hum of the coffee maker, the sound of sparrows outside. There's peace in the stillness, a peace I once thought I'd never feel again. It's strange how calm can settle into a place that used to echo with pain. It's been a few months since that day. Ryan kept in touch, slowly, cautiously. He started working at a community program, paying back what he owed one piece at a time. He's in therapy now, trying to understand the choices that brought him here. Melissa left for a while, but from what I hear, she's finding her own way too. I don't know if they'll ever find each other again, and maybe that's all right. Sometimes healing requires distance. As for me, I didn't realize how much space pain had taken up inside me until it was gone. I stopped looking for closure from others and started building it myself. I planted a small garden in the backyard. Roses, lavender, a few herbs for the kitchen. There's something about tending to life that reminds you of your own resilience. Every time I see those new blooms pushing through the soil, I think about how I did the same. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about deciding it no longer gets to control you. When I forgave Ryan, I didn't erase the past. I just stopped carrying it. There's a freedom in that choice, one that feels softer than victory, but far more powerful. Sometimes I still catch myself looking at old photos, remembering birthdays, laughter, the years before everything fell apart. But the difference now is that those memories don't ache anymore. They just remind me that love, even when broken, teaches us who we are. If you've ever had to forgive someone who hurt you deeply, you know how heavy that decision can be. It's not easy, it's not instant, but it's worth it. Because peace doesn't come from revenge, it comes from release. I've made my peace with the past. The door that once brought pain now opens to light, and that, I think, is what healing truly looks like. Have you ever had to let go of someone to find peace? Tell me your story. Maybe together, we can remind someone else that healing is possible. The day began like any other. Quiet, uneventful, almost peaceful. But peace has a strange way of breaking when you least expect it. I remember the sound before anything else, the sharp knock against the front door that echoed through the house like a warning. It wasn't the kind of knock people use when they come home. It was careful, deliberate, and somehow, even before I reached the handle, I knew something was off. When I opened the door, I saw them. Ryan, my son, and Melissa, his fiancée. Two faces I hadn't seen in years, standing on my porch as if 12 years hadn't passed. They smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals. My heart wanted to run to him, to hold him the way I used to when he was small. But something in me froze. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was instinct, the quiet voice that says, "Be careful this time." Their suitcases sat beside them like unspoken confessions. Ryan's eyes wouldn't meet mine, and Melissa's were far too warm, too polished. She spoke gently, almost rehearsed, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a visit. This was something else, something they needed. In that moment, a flood of memories rushed in. Nights I waited by the phone, years of silence, letters never answered. And now here they were, on my doorstep, acting like the past could be folded neatly into the present. I should have been overjoyed, but instead, I felt the sting of something colder, betrayal wrapped in affection. Still, I didn't let it show. I've learned the power of quiet, of holding your ground in silence. I smiled, stepped aside, and told them to come in. But inside, my thoughts were already unraveling. I could sense a story behind their eyes, a reason too heavy for their smiles to carry. And as I closed the door behind them, I realized I wasn't the same woman they'd left behind. That day, standing in the doorway of my own home, I understood what intuition truly feels like. It's not panic or fear. It's clarity, the kind that whispers, "This time, don't look away." And I didn't. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a reunion. It was the beginning of a truth I could no longer ignore. If there's one thing my story taught me, it's that love without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. I spent years trying to earn peace from people who only took pieces of me, until I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door. It means locking it with grace and walking forward without hate. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after someone you trusted broke you, tell me how you found your strength. I read every word, and your story might be the one someone else needs to hear.